the why and how of data visualization. This in itself would take a while to cover, but I will kind of blaze through a few main points and show you a few things that I think are interesting and important. Some of this will be fairly basic, but I hope to show you things that you don't know, even about things like bar charts. So the first question I think that is important to ask, and in fact, this is really the key question in my humble opinion, is not so much which chart type to use or how many data points do you have or whatever, but why visualize data? Why do we even do that? What's the purpose of doing this? If I may get so existential this early in the morning, but it's like, what is the point of doing this, and why do we even create these charts? And is it just because we're supposed to put figures into papers, or what is the reason? And to make it even more existential here, I would just reduce this down to a single simple word here, which is why. Why are we doing this? What are we trying to gain? And I think this is really important to ask every time you create a chart, because that really drives what the right kind of chart is. There are a lot of supposed rules about data viz, and I'll talk about some of them, but most of them are irrelevant if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. There is a great quote that I think this is Richard Hamming, who wrote somewhere that the purpose of computing is insight, not numbers. And in 1999, in a book called Readings in Information Visualization, Card, McKinney, and Schneiderman came up with this sort of version of that said the purpose of visualization is insight, not pictures. So it's not about the visuals. The visuals are a means to an end. They're a tool. It's the point of visualization is to gain something else. There, if you know Wittgenstein, he had this idea of the ladder that you climb and then you throw it away because you've gone up whatever you need to go up on with that ladder, and then the tool is no longer needed. So the visualization is not a thing in itself. It's not that important. It's important what you do with it. I will come back to this a few more times. And here's just a sort of a visual representation of this that I find very amusing. This is from an old comic from a long time ago. I found this in a book on painting, but and I'm not sure if you can read this, but the first one, in the first part of this guy is pointing at this abstract painting and saying, haha, what does this represent? And then the painting says, well, what do you represent? And I think this is another way of thinking about, well, representation, data representation is, and I kind of think about this a lot. It's like, what does it do for us? What can we learn? All right, so with that, I'm going to show you an example that if you've been around data visualization, sort of like materials, you may have seen this before, but I still think it's quite useful. So here we are in a little observable notebook. I can look at a data set here. This is called Anscombe's quartet. And what I can do here is I can look at numbers. So the Anscombe's quartet is 4 groups of numbers. They each have an X and a Y column, and the group column here to tell me which group they're in. And I can look through them. I could just like click on one of these groups here, and I can see what the numbers are. And it's not going to be very interesting because it's just a bunch of numbers. And what Anscombe's quartet also does, or what these numbers have in common, is that each group is has the same summary statistics, or very similar summary statistics, and actually more than just the ones that you see here, but these are just ones that I quickly kind of threw together here. But we look at the mean or the average for the X and the Y axis, the standard deviations on both of them, the R squared value here, the correlation coefficient, even the slope and intercept of the correlation line would be the same, or very nearly the same. They're down to like a couple of digits. They are the same. So by all sort of like accounts, that if you do summary statistics on them, this seems like there are just 4 groups of numbers that are the same. They look the same. They might not actually differ at all. But when we create a chart, and that's where, once I can actually click on here, why am I not getting this? There you go. If I want to make a chart, and I'm going to make a chart of Anscombe here, I'm going to make a simple chart here that's going to map the X value onto the X axis. I'm going to put the Y value on the Y axis, and then I'm going to break this down into facets by the group. So faceting means I make 4 charts here because I've got 4 groups, And we can already see that there are some patterns appearing. I'm going to make this a little bit better by making this more square. And maybe I'll turn on some grid lines just for fun. And we can see that these 4 groups really look very different. They have different shapes, and those shapes aren't apparent from these statistics. But what we're looking at here is a more holistic view, really. We're looking at this now. It's very obvious that there are shapes here, right? So this looks more like a typical scatter plot of like points that are highly correlated, but they're not exactly on that correlation on that line. Here we have this kind of parabolic shape. Here we have a straight line with an outlier, and here we have all the values on the y-axis. I'm sorry, on the x-axis being the same, with this outlier out here. So we can see these patterns like immediately. It's almost silly to even point this out, but they are just very apparent. I can just add some color here just for fun, but I can see that that there are differences between these groups that wouldn't be apparent from just doing statistics. And so that's the power of the visual, is that we can see patterns. We could now get into like, well, how different is this number than that number? And that's not what visualization is good for. What visualization is good for is really seeing patterns, seeing overall pictures of what's going on in your data.